The first is the silence of a perfectly executed line of code. It's the clean, frictionless hum of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's order. It's predictability. For the last 15 years, I've built my life around that silence. I live in a glass-walled house on the shores of Lake Washington, where the Seattle sky's perpetual gray drizzle mutes the world outside. I work from a minimalist office overlooking the water, my fingers moving across a keyboard with an economy of motion that comes from 30 years of practice. My clients, mostly sprawling, faceless corporations, think of me as a digital plumber. They call me when their systems are clogged, when the elegant architecture designed by some bright-eyed 20-something from Stanford starts leaking data or producing gibberish. I go in, find the broken pipe, patch it, and send an invoice. I am methodical, reliable, and expensive. They pay for the silence I restore. They pay for me to make the noise go away. It's a good life, a quiet life, a life I chose, a life I fought for after leaving a world where the zeros and ones didn't hum, they screamed. The second kind of silence is the one that's fallen over my marriage. It's not a clean silence. It's the silence of a void. The heavy, pressurized quiet that comes just before a system crashes. And it all started with a man named Julian. My wife, Jessica, has always been the vibrant, chaotic variable in my orderly equation. Where I see structure, she sees color. Where I build walls, she plants gardens. She was an art curator before we decided she should take a break. A woman who could speak for an hour about the emotional resonance of a single brushstroke. Now, she spoke of only one thing: Julian. It began subtly a few months ago. A new name mentioned over dinner. Julian thinks the future is in curated digital experiences. A week later, Julian's networking skills are just on another level. Soon, his name was a constant presence in our home, a ghost at our table. He was her new business mentor, a visionary guru who was helping her launch some vague online art platform. I watched the change in her. Her phone, once a tool, became a religious relic, clutched in her hand at all times. The soft glow of its screen would illuminate her face late into the night, her thumbs moving in a feverish tap-tap-tapping. A strange, almost manic energy had taken hold of her. Her eyes, which I could read better than any programming language, now held a guarded, feverish glint I didn't recognize. Our conversations became peppered with a lexicon of startup buzzwords that sounded alien coming from her lips. Synergy, disruption, pivot, scaling. She spoke of seed funding and vertical integration with the breathless conviction of a new convert. Every idea was Julian's. Every strategy was his brainchild. His genius, she claimed, was in seeing connections no one else could. I am an analyst by nature. I don't deal in feelings, I deal in data. And the data was showing a critical anomaly. Her praise for this man was too polished, her explanations too vague. It sounded less like a genuine partnership and more like a script, like she was reading lines from a press release. At first, the most logical conclusion was the simplest one: an affair. The thought was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It was a bug in the source code of our lives, a betrayal of the core protocols we'd established over a decade together. I could have confronted her. I could have demanded to see her phone. But that's not my way. A direct assault is clumsy. It alerts the system to your presence. True mastery lies in observation, in understanding the architecture of a problem before you even think about solving it. So I watched. I listened. I compiled data points, the late-night texts, the sudden, unexplained withdrawals from our joint account, always justified as initial investments for the project. The way she'd flinch if I walked into the room while she was on a call, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I told myself I was being patient, that I was gathering enough information to approach the problem rationally. But I was lying. I was delaying. Because I knew, with the cold certainty of a compiler finding a fatal error, that the moment I ran the diagnostic, the system would crash, the silence would break, and the noise would be deafening. The facade of normalcy can be a powerful anesthetic. We maintained it for another week. We had dinner at Canlis for our anniversary, the city lights of Seattle glittering below us like a fallen constellation. We talked about the weather, about a new exhibit at the Frye Museum, about everything and nothing. It was a perfectly rendered simulation of a happy marriage, but the latency was off. The pauses between sentences were a fraction too long. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes. The whole performance was dropping frames. The crash came on a Tuesday. It was raining, a relentless, percussive drumming against the glass walls of our house. Jessica had made coq au vin, a dish she only attempts when she wants something. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, another layer in the carefully constructed domestic scene. We sat at the dining table, the polished wood reflecting the warm, low light. She let the wine breathe. She let the silence stretch. She was building up to it. I could see the subroutines running behind her eyes, rehearsing the pitch. "Michael," she began, her voice a carefully modulated blend of excitement and nonchalance. "We've hit a major milestone." "We?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral, swirling the burgundy in my glass. "Julian and I," she clarified, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "We've secured a provisional patent for our core algorithm, the one that matches collectors with emerging artists. It's the secret sauce." I nodded slowly. "That's great, Jess. Congratulations." "It is," she said, leaning forward, the performance kicking into high gear. "But it means we have to move fast. Like, now." Another startup in the Bay Area is working on something similar. We need to lock in our key developers and secure the server infrastructure before they get to market. Julian has it all lined up, but we need to show proof of funds. It's an opportunity, Michael, the kind that only comes once. There it was, the request payload. I waited. She took a deep breath. "I need $50,000 as a bridge loan just until the first round of venture capital funding closes next month." 50,000. On top of the 20 or 30 she'd already siphoned off in smaller increments. The number was significant, but it was the logic that was flawed. Any VC worth their salt would see a provisional patent and a sound business plan as enough. This smelled of desperation. This was not a business move. It was something else. I decided to run a simple diagnostic. I kept my expression open, curious, the concerned husband. "The platform," I said, "the algorithm. What's the back end built on? I'm just curious. Are you using a relational database like PostgreSQL or something more flexible like MongoDB? It'll make a huge difference in how you scale user data." It was a simple question. Tech 101. Anyone building a legitimate online platform, especially the visionary she described, would have an immediate, enthusiastic answer. Jessica froze. It was just for a second, a micro-expression of pure panic. A system encountering a query it has no script for. Her brain searched for a response, for a line, for anything. The silence stretched. The only sound was the rain hammering against the glass. Then she found it. She straightened her back, adopting an air of condescending pity, as if I were a child who couldn't possibly understand the world of high-level strategy. She delivered the line with perfect, rehearsed clarity. Julian says technical details are just noise for visionaries. 11 words. That was it. That was the kill command. In that instant, every variable resolved, every fragmented piece of data snapped into place with chilling precision. It wasn't just the dismissiveness, the casual insult to my entire life's work. It was the structure of the sentence. It was a thought-terminating cliché. A prepackaged, weaponized phrase designed to shut down inquiry, to deflect scrutiny, to make the questioner feel small and foolish. It wasn't her voice. It wasn't her thought. It was a line fed to her by someone else. The affair theory evaporated. An affair is a crime of passion. It's messy, human, chaotic. This was not chaos. This was a system, a meticulously designed social engineering exploit. Julian wasn't a lover. Julian was a tool of manipulation, a carefully crafted persona designed to isolate her, build her up, and then fleece her. And she was the perfect target. Smart, proud, but feeling unfulfilled, desperate for a project of her own. Someone had found her vulnerability and was running a rootkit on her soul. The knot of betrayal in my stomach didn't loosen. It turned to ice. My anger, hot and sharp a moment before, cooled into something far more dangerous, absolute, crystalline certainty. The problem was no longer my wife's suspected infidelity. The problem was the architect of this script. The enemy wasn't in my home. He was out there, somewhere in the city, pulling her strings. And he had just made a fatal error. He had dismissed the technical details. He had dismissed me. I looked at Jessica, but I wasn't seeing my wife anymore. I was seeing a compromised terminal, a beautiful, complex machine infected with malware. I gave her a slow, reassuring smile. "You're right," I said, my voice calm and steady. "He's absolutely right. Visionaries shouldn't get bogged down in the weeds. My mistake." Relief washed over her face, so pure and complete it was almost painful to watch. She thought she'd won. "Okay, Jess," I said, taking a sip of wine. "I'll make the transfer in the morning." She beamed, the brilliant, radiant smile I hadn't seen in months. But I felt nothing. The emotional connection was firewalled. The husband protocol was suspended. That night, as Jessica slept soundly beside me for the first time in weeks, I lay awake in the dark, the rain still lashing against the windows. I stared at the ceiling, my mind a silent rush of processing power. The objective had been defined. The threat had been identified. Phase 1, data collection, was over. Phase 2 was about to begin. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. As the rhythmic breathing of my wife filled the room, I slipped out of bed. The house was dark, the only light coming from the moon, its faint glow filtering through the rain-streaked windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floors. I didn't turn on any lights. I knew the layout of this house like the back of my hand, every step, every potential creak. I moved with a practiced silence down to my office. The first instinct, the amateur's instinct, would have been to grab her phone, to brute force my way past her password and into her digital life. It would have been easy. I've broken into systems 1,000,000 times more secure than a commercially available smartphone, but it's a messy approach. It leaves footprints, digital breadcrumbs that could alert the operator on the other end. It triggers the system's defenses. No, this required finesse. This required a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. I sat down at my workstation, the triple monitor setup glowing to life with a soft hum. For a moment, I just stared at the clean, empty desktop. This was my sanctuary, the place where I imposed order on a chaotic world. Now the chaos had breached the perimeter. I started with the name Julian Vance. I didn't use a standard search engine. Google, Bing. They're for consumers. They give you the results they think you want to see, curated, sanitized, and logged. I went deeper. I used custom-built crawlers that scraped the deep web, accessed archived GeoCities pages, and cross-referenced data from dozens of international business registries and social media APIs. I was looking for a digital shadow, any trace of a man with that name connected to the Seattle tech or art scene. For 3 hours, I hunted. I sifted through terabytes of data. I found a Julian Vance who was a retired orthodontist in Florida. I found a Julian Vance who was a semi-professional bowler in Ohio. I found 17 Julian Vances in the UK. But in the interconnected, ego-driven world of tech startups and venture capital, a world where your digital footprint is your currency, my Julian Vance did not exist. No LinkedIn profile boasting of past successes. No Crunchbase entry detailing his funding history. No slick personal website with a blog about disruptive innovation. No smug tweets. No photos of him speaking on a panel at some overpriced conference. He was a ghost, a digital construct, a name attached to an empty shell. This confirmed my theory. This wasn't a real person, it was a fiction, a character in a play written for an audience of one, Jessica. The $50,000 transfer was still pending in my account, scheduled for 8 a.m. I canceled it. That money wasn't going to a business. It was going into a black hole. My search had failed to find him, but it had succeeded in proving he wasn't real. The problem was no longer digital. It had a physical component. Jessica wasn't meeting a ghost. She was meeting someone. She was going somewhere. My expertise ends at the edge of the keyboard. For the physical world, for the messy, unpredictable domain of human behavior in real space, I needed a different kind of specialist. The first rays of dawn were beginning to slice through the gray Seattle sky when I picked up my phone. I didn't use my personal contacts. I scrolled to a number that wasn't saved under a name, just a string of 16 random characters. It was a burner phone number I hadn't called in almost a decade. I prayed the man on the other end was still using it. It rang 3 times, then a gravelly voice, thick with sleep and cynicism, answered. "Yeah." "Frank," I said. "It's Michael Reeves." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the sound of a mattress creaking, the flick of a lighter, and then a slow exhale of smoke. Frank Donovan was an old-school private investigator, an ex-SPD detective who had taken early retirement after becoming thoroughly disgusted with the department's bureaucracy. He was a man who believed in shoe leather, stakeouts, and trusting his gut. He was the analog counterpart to my digital world. We'd crossed paths once, years ago, on a corporate espionage case where I'd traced the data breach and he'd found the guy selling it. We'd developed a quiet, professional respect for one another. "Reeves," he grumbled. Jesus. I figured you'd either be in a federal prison or on a private island by now. Just Seattle, Frank, I said. What do you want? I'm retired, mostly. I need eyes, Frank. Not a background check. Not a data pull. Just eyes. I could almost hear him shrug. Eyes cost money. Your standard rate plus a 20% bonus for discretion and speed. I'll wire the retainer today. He grunted, a sound of reluctant interest. Who am I looking at? I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Saying the words made it real. My wife, Jessica Reeves. There was no judgment in the ensuing silence, just the quiet professionalism of a man hearing the details of a job. What am I looking for? He asked. She says she's working on a startup, meeting with a business partner. I want to know where she's really going, who she's really meeting. I don't want them to know they're being watched. I just need an address and a name. That's it. You think she's cheating, Reeves? I think it's more complicated than that, I said, looking out the window as the surface of the lake turned from black to a cold, steely gray. Just find out where the money is going, Frank. Text me her photo, car, and daily schedule, he said, his voice all business now. I'll get started today. I hung up. The sun was up. I could hear the shower running upstairs. Jessica was getting ready for her day, preparing to meet her ghost. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my glasses. The trap was set. The hunter was in the field. All I had to do now was wait for the data to come in. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in my house felt like the calm before a storm. Waiting is an exercise in controlled anxiety. For 2 days, I played the part of the supportive, oblivious husband. I made coffee in the morning. I asked about her project, nodding along to her increasingly elaborate fictions about Julian's brilliance and their imminent success. I worked at my console, but my focus wasn't on the corporate code I was debugging. My mind was a distributed network, one part running the simulation of my normal life, the other processing a constant, low-level stream of dread. Jessica was a terrible liar, but she was a passionate performer. She believed her own script. Each morning she would get dressed in sharp business casual attire, an outfit meant for a sleek downtown co-working space, not for whatever it was she was really doing. She'd kiss me goodbye, the gesture feeling practiced and hollow, and drive off in her Audi, radiating an aura of purpose. My phone remained silent. Frank Donovan was a professional. He wouldn't call with speculation or half-formed theories. He would call when he had a definitive answer. The call came on Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of a conference call, explaining a complex data migration strategy to a team of project managers in Chicago, when my burner phone vibrated in my pocket. I excused myself, citing a poor connection, and walked out onto the deck overlooking the lake. The water was choppy, the sky a familiar shade of gunmetal gray. Talk to me, Frank, I said, my voice low. She's not in a co-working space, he said, his voice a low grumble over the line. There was the sound of traffic in the background. And she's not meeting any slick-haired tech bro named Julian. Where is she? An industrial park in Sodo off Crane Street, number 141. It's an old brick warehouse, looks like it was a fish cannery 100 years ago. No signage, blacked-out windows, just a single steel door with a keypad and a camera. My mind raced, trying to parse the data. An industrial park, a nondescript warehouse. It didn't fit any known pattern. What's in there? Can't tell from the outside, Frank said. But the people coming and going, they are not the startup type. They're the type who look like they've just lost their dog. Or their house. She's been here both days. Arrives around 10. Leaves well after dark. Today she, still inside. A pause. You should probably see this for yourself, Michael. This ain't a love affair. He gave me the address again and hung up. The drive to Soto felt surreal. I left my Tesla in the garage and took my old Jeep, a relic from a time before my life became so quiet and orderly. I navigated through the Seattle traffic, the mundane reality of commuters and delivery trucks, a stark contrast to the cold dread coiling in my gut. Soto was a neighborhood of forgotten industries, a maze of railway lines, concrete silos, and sprawling warehouses. It was the city's gritty underbelly, a world away from the pristine glass and steel of my lakeside life. I found Crane Street and parked a block away, watching from the tinted windows of the Jeep. Number 141 was exactly as Frank had described it. A monolithic brick building, its windows painted black, exuding an air of anonymity and menace. There was nothing to indicate what business was conducted behind its walls. A man in an expensive but rumpled suit exited the steel door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He fumbled for his car keys, his hand shaking. I waited. For hours. As dusk settled, the industrial neighborhood grew quiet. The streetlights flickered on, casting a sickly yellow glow on the wet pavement. My simulation of a normal life had completely shattered. This was the raw, uncompiled code of reality. Just after 10 p.m., the steel door opened again. Jessica emerged. The sight of her hit me like a physical blow. The confident, purposeful woman who had left our home that morning was gone. The person who stood blinking in the dim light was a ghost. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes hollowed out, dark with a despair so profound it seemed to suck the light out of the air around her. Her expensive clothes looked wrong on her, like a costume on a broken doll. She walked to her car with the slow, shuffling gait of someone carrying an immense, invisible weight. She didn't cheat on me. It was worse. Whatever was happening in that building wasn't taking her body. It was devouring her soul. I let her get a few blocks ahead before I started the Jeep and followed, keeping my distance. I drove home on autopilot, my mind a maelstrom of unanswered questions. When I walked into our kitchen, she was standing at the island, staring into a glass of water as if it held the answers to the universe. She hadn't even taken off her coat. She looked up when I entered, and her face crumpled. There was no artifice left, no performance. Just raw, unshielded shame. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. My anger was a white-hot nova, but I contained it, compressed it into a single point of cold focus. I walked to the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and stood beside her. "How much?" I asked. My voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a razor. That one question was all it took. Her carefully constructed world, her elaborate fiction of Julian and the startup, disintegrated. A sob tore from her chest, a ragged, ugly sound of pure agony. The story came pouring out, a torrent of confession and self-loathing that had clearly been dammed up for years. It started small, she said, with online poker after she quit her job. A way to feel a thrill, a spark of the high-stakes art world she'd left behind. It was a secret she kept, a small, contained vice. But it grew. The stakes got higher. The losses mounted. Then a friend told her about a private, exclusive place. A place where she could win it all back. The house on Crane Street. She had been going for almost a year. The debt had spiraled out of control. Julian, she admitted through her tears, was a fiction. A lie she told me, and more importantly, a lie she told herself. He was the fantasy of success she clung to while she was drowning in the reality of failure. He was the excuse for the missing money, the cover for the secret shame that was eating her alive. I let her cry until she was exhausted. Then I asked the question again, my voice still quiet, still dangerously calm. "Jessica, how much do you owe them?" She flinched, unable to meet my eyes. She stared at the floor, her voice barely audible. "It's not 50,000. I waited. $380,000. She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading for an explosion, for anger, for anything other than the terrifying stillness she saw on my face. "Michael, I'm so sorry." Sorry wasn't the right word. Sorry was for spilling coffee. This was a catastrophic system failure. $380,000. It wasn't about the money. We could absorb the loss. It was about the hook they had in her. It was a debt designed to be unpayable. It was a leash. In that moment, the target of my cold rage shifted. It wasn't Jessica. She wasn't the perpetrator. She was a victim. A mark. My anger locked onto the faceless architects of her ruin. The people in that building who had cultivated her weakness, fed her addiction, and were now systematically bleeding her dry. They had taken my wife. They had tried to take my money. They had just made an enemy of the wrong man. The pain of betrayal is a complex algorithm. It has subroutines for anger, grief, and confusion. For a few hours, I let them run. I listened to Jessica's broken, disjointed confession, watching as years of carefully suppressed truth flooded the quiet, orderly spaces of our home. I saw the full picture now, the desperate hope of winning back losses, the shame that prevented her from telling me, the spiraling cycle of debt that had led her to create the elaborate fiction of Julian. She was a fly caught in a spider's web, and the more she struggled, the more entangled she became. But my anger is a finite resource. It burns hot and fast, and then it cools, solidifying into something colder, harder, and infinitely more useful: resolve. The emotional damage assessment could wait. Right now, there was a threat to be neutralized. By dawn, Jessica had cried herself to sleep in the guest room. I was back in my office, the city lights across the lake just beginning to fade into the pre-dawn gloom. The problem had been redefined. The objective was no longer to uncover a secret. It was to dismantle an operation. I picked up the burner phone and called Frank. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been expecting it. "She told you," he said. It wasn't a question. "She told me," I confirmed. "The operation in that warehouse is my new focus. I'm no longer interested in my wife's activities. I want to know everything about the person who runs that place. The owner. The architect of the entire system. I want his name, his habits, his legitimate businesses, his pressure points, his favorite brand of coffee. I want to know where he is vulnerable. I want a complete system schematic of his life." "Michael, that's not a missing persons case." Frank's voice was low, cautious. "You're asking me to run surveillance on a serious player. The kind of guy who doesn't just sue you if he finds out. The kind of guy who makes problems disappear. This is a different league." "I'm aware," I said, my voice flat. and I'll be compensating you accordingly. Double your usual rate for this kind of high-risk profile. Consider it a hazard bonus." There was a long silence on the line. I could hear him thinking, weighing the risk against the reward. Frank was old, but he wasn't obsolete. He knew the difference between a domestic dispute and poking a hornet's nest. "You're not a cop anymore, Frank," I added, my tone softening slightly. "You're a private contractor. This is just a job. You gather the intel. I'll decide what to do with it. You'll be insulated." "Nobody's ever fully insulated, Reeves," he grumbled. "All right. I'll make some calls, talk to some old contacts, but you need to understand what you're stepping into. These guys aren't amateurs." "Neither am I," said, and hung up. The next 3 days were a masterclass in compartmentalization. On the surface, I was the supportive husband. I made sure Jessica was eating. I encouraged her to talk to a therapist who specialized in gambling addiction, a contact I found through a discreet, high-end service. We spoke in quiet, measured tones. The trust between us was shattered, but a new, fragile foundation was being laid. One built not on romantic illusion, but on the stark reality of a shared crisis. She was broken, but she was fighting. And for that, she had my full operational support. But in the silent hours of the night, in the digital sanctuary of my office, I was a different man. I was a strategist, a hunter. Frank's first report came via an encrypted email. It was concise, professional, and chilling. The owner of the establishment at 141 Crane Street was a man named Silas Thorne. Publicly, Silas Thorne was a pillar of the Seattle arts community. He owned 3 of the most prestigious galleries in Pioneer Square. He sat on the board of the Symphony and was a major donor to the museum. His photo regularly appeared in society magazines, arm in arm with politicians and philanthropists at charity galas. He was handsome, charismatic, and impeccably dressed. He projected an image of old money, culture, and civic virtue. Privately, according to Frank, as sources in the city's underbelly, Thorne was known by a single, ominous moniker, the Architect. He wasn't just a bookie, he was a predator who had perfected a system. Frank's report laid it out. Thorne didn't target junkies or street-level gamblers. He targeted the affluent and the desperate. People like Jessica. People with assets to seize and reputations to ruin. He created bespoke traps. His operation wasn't just a casino, it was a comprehensive debt enslavement program. The Julian persona, Frank speculated, was likely one of his signature moves, a psychological tool, a confidence man, tailored to the specific emotional needs of the target. He didn't just offer a game of chance, he offered a fantasy. For some, it might be a beautiful woman showing them attention for the first time in years. For others, a father figure offering praise. For Jessica, it was a business mentor who saw her untapped potential. He found the void in their lives and filled it with a carefully crafted illusion, all the while digging his financial hooks in deeper. Once the debt was insurmountable, the Architect's true business began. He didn't send thugs to break legs. That was crude. He used the debt as leverage. He'd force his victims to sign over property, company shares, or most valuable of all, information. He was a master of extortion and blackmail, using the shame and secrets of his clients to build a silent, invisible empire of influence. Reading the report, my blood ran cold. This was a man who didn't just build systems, he weaponized them against people. He treated human weakness as a design flaw to be exploited. He was my dark reflection. The final part of Frank's report was a list of Thorne's assets, the galleries, a portfolio of commercial real estate, a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, and a high-tech penthouse apartment in a downtown skyscraper. The penthouse. That was the nerve center. That was where the real man lived, behind the carefully constructed public facade. I closed the file. The enemy had a name. He had a face. He had an infrastructure, and every infrastructure has a vulnerability. I stood up and walked to a heavy, dust-covered trunk in the corner of my office. I hadn't opened it in 15 years. I keyed in the combination lock and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was the hardware of my old life. A set of hardened laptops, satellite links, decryption keys, and an array of devices whose purpose was best left unexplained. I pulled out a sleek black server blade, no bigger than a hardcover book. The label on it was a single word, written in faded marker, Cassandra. It was my personal toolkit. A suite of custom-built programs and exploits I had created in my youth. A time when I saw the entire digital world as a puzzle to be solved, a lock to be picked. Cassandra was my master key. I plugged it in. The server hummed to life, its fans spinning silently. On my main monitor, a new command prompt appeared, a simple blinking cursor against a black screen. It was an old friend. The quiet, orderly life of Michael Reeves, digital plumber, was over. Cassandra was back online. There, a smell to old hardware. A faint metallic tang of ozone, dust, and dormant electricity. It was the smell of my youth. The smell of sleepless nights fueled by caffeine and obsession, of chasing ghosts through the nascent veins of the internet. For 15 years, I had traded that world for the scent of fresh-cut grass and Jessica's expensive French perfume. Now the old smell was back, and it felt like coming home. My basement is the one part of our modern glass and cedar house that doesn't fit. It's a concrete bunker, cool and dry, designed as a wine cellar we never used. Over the years, it had become my digital graveyard. Underneath dusty tarps lay the ghosts of my former life. Stacks of servers, spools of fiber optic cable, and heavily shielded rack mounts. This wasn't a hobbyist setup. It was the command center of a man who once waged silent wars. I spent the next 2 days in that bunker, resurrecting my past. I wasn't just plugging things in. I was performing a digital resuscitation. The world had changed in 15 years. The protocols were different, the security more complex. My old tools, my Cassandra toolkit, needed to be updated, sharpened, and adapted for a new battlefield. I worked with a monk-like focus. The world outside the basement ceased to exist. Jessica would leave meals for me at the top of the stairs, a silent offering. She didn't ask questions. She saw the change in me, the shift from a quiet, passive man to someone with a terrifying, singular purpose. I think it scared her, but I also think, for the first time, she felt a sliver of hope. She had stumbled into a cage with a monster, and she was beginning to realize she might be married to something far more dangerous. My first task was to map Silas Thorne's digital empire. I didn't touch his personal accounts or the casino's network. A direct probe would be noisy, easily detected. Amateurs knock on the front door. I started with the periphery. His public-facing businesses, the art galleries, were my way in. They were his firewall, his respectable public face. I started with their websites, their social media, their online payment portals. They were professionally done, slick and secure to the casual observer. But to me, they were a latticework of tiny, invisible flaws. I found an outdated WordPress plugin on one of the gallery sites, a tiny, forgotten backdoor. It took me 6 hours to write a custom exploit, a piece of code so elegant and quiet, it would slip past their intrusion detection systems like a whisper. I didn't smash the lock. I convinced the lock it had never been closed. Once inside, I didn't steal anything. I didn't deface the site. I planted a listener, a tiny passive piece of my own code, a digital fly on the wall that would simply watch and report. It logged every keystroke, copied every email that passed through their local server, and mapped their internal network topology. From there, I pivoted. I followed the digital breadcrumbs from the gallery's server to Thorn's real estate company. Then from the real estate company to the payroll service they used. Each step was a patient, methodical leapfrog, using the credentials and trust of one compromised system to gain access to the next. I was building a map, a comprehensive schematic of Thorn as entire legitimate business operation. The data flowed back to my basement command center, populating my screens with flowcharts, spreadsheets, and database schemas. It painted a picture of a man who was meticulous, paranoid, and arrogant. His personal and illegal activities were carefully air-gapped from his public businesses. He used shell corporations, encrypted communication channels, and proxies routed through Eastern Europe. He was good. He was a professional. But everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has a routine. Everyone trusts something or someone. After 72 hours of relentless work, I found his vulnerability. It wasn't in his code. It was in his psychology. Silas Thorn, the master manipulator, the man who built an empire on exploiting the weaknesses of others, had a weakness of his own: ego. He had to be in control. I found it in the metadata of his communications. He used a custom-built, heavily encrypted messaging app to communicate with his inner circle. Standard practice for a man in his position, but buried deep in the app's configuration files, which I pulled from the compromised laptop of his gallery manager, I found a developer's note. Thorn had commissioned the app himself, but he didn't trust the developers. He had insisted on a master key functionality, a single point of access that would allow him, and only him, to decrypt any message on the network. He couldn't stand the idea of his own subordinates having secrets from him. He had built a fortress with 1,000 locks, and then created a single key that could open them all. He kept that key on a sandboxed, physically isolated laptop in his penthouse. The path forward was now clear. I couldn't break into his penthouse digitally. The air gap was too strong. His personal network was a digital island, completely disconnected from the outside world. If I couldn't get to the island by sea, I would have to walk in through the front door. My time as a passive observer, as a ghost in his machine, was over. I needed to get inside his world, his physical world. I needed to stand in the same room with him. I needed an invitation to the house on Crane Street. And to do that, I had to stop being Michael Reeves. I had to become someone else. Someone Silas Thorn would not see as a threat. Someone he would see as his next perfect victim. To catch a predator, you must offer the perfect bait. My target wasn't a common thug. Silas Thorn was a connoisseur of human frailty. He wouldn't be tempted by a simple display of wealth. He was looking for a specific vintage, a combination of deep pockets, a glaring emotional weakness, and a profound, exploitable arrogance. I needed to become a man he couldn't resist preying on. So in the digital forge of my basement, I began to craft a legend. His name would be Marcus Vanderbilt. The name was the first stroke of the brush. It was intentionally, almost comically, ostentatious. It whispered of old money, of East Coast establishment, of a legacy so profound it bordered on parody. It was the kind of name that a man like Thorne, who had likely clawed his way to his current position, would both resent and covet. Next came the backstory. Marcus was the black sheep of a powerful New York family, the Vanderbilt Commodities dynasty, a completely fictional but plausible-sounding entity. He was the artist, the wastrel, the disappointment, sent to Seattle with a massive trust fund and a gentle but firm suggestion to stay out of the family's real business. His weakness. A desperate, pathetic need to prove himself a bigger man than his titan of industry father. His addiction wouldn't be gambling, not at first. It would be risk. The thrill of the wager, the validation of a successful bet. But a story is nothing without evidence. For the next 48 hours, I became a digital god, breathing life into my creation. I didn't just build a fake social media profile. Amateurs build fake profiles. I built a fake digital life. Using a network of dormant accounts and compromised servers I'd maintained for years, my personal digital ghost army, I began to backdate Marcus as existence. I created a decade's worth of history. I inserted his name into the archives of a prestigious New England boarding school's alumni newsletter. I fabricated articles in the society pages of obscure Hamptons magazines, mentioning his presence at polo matches and charity galas. I used sophisticated photo manipulation software, aging images of a generic, handsome model, and seamlessly inserting Marcus into old photos from these events. He was there, a ghost in the background, a face in the crowd, just enough to be plausible if someone were to do a deep dive background check. I built his financial footprint. Using a series of anonymous crypto transactions and offshore accounts, I established a clear, traceable, but ultimately untraceable to me, flow of money into a new bank account at a private Seattle bank, opened under the meticulously forged identity of Marcus Vanderbilt. The initial deposit was a little over $3 million, enough to get noticed, but not enough to trigger federal alarms. The final touch, the one that would appeal directly to Thorne's own interests, was art. I created a blog for Marcus, a pretentious, rambling affair filled with half-baked critiques of modern art. It positioned him as a man with more money than taste, a collector who bought art not for its beauty, but for its perceived status. He was the perfect mark for a gallery owner. The legend was complete. Marcus Vanderbilt was real. He had a past, a present, and a very expensive future. Now, I had to release him into the wild. The first move had to be physical, loud, and public. I went to a high-end luxury car dealership in Bellevue. I didn't go as myself, the quiet programmer in a sensible jacket. I went as Marcus. I wore a tailored suit I hadn't touched in years, an expensive watch, and an air of bored entitlement I'd learned from observing the executives I used to work for. I didn't haggle. I pointed at the most expensive car on the floor, a graphite gray Aston Martin DB11, and I paid for it with a wire transfer from Marcus Vanderbilt's account. The transaction was flagged for review, as expected. I made a show of being annoyed, placed a call to my private banker, and within 20 minutes, the funds were cleared. The dealership staff treated me like royalty. The story of the mysterious East Coast heir who dropped $500,000 on a car without blinking would be all over the city, as high-end service industry circles by nightfall. The second move was more direct. I used Frank to get me the guest list for a major charity auction that I knew Silas Thorne would be attending. It was the kind of event where Seattle's elite gathered to out-donate each other for public acclaim. Getting a ticket on short notice was impossible, so I made a 5-figure donation to the charity, a sum that guaranteed Marcus Vanderbilt a premium table right next to the stage. The night of the auction, I saw Silas Thorne in person for the first time. He was exactly as his photos portrayed him, charming, elegant, moving through the crowd with the practiced grace of a shark. He was the center of every conversation he was in, a low-key gravitational force. I ignored him. I played the part of Marcus perfectly. I was aloof, slightly drunk, and openly dismissive of the local luminaries. I bid on a few minor items, letting them go to other bidders, creating the impression that I was just playing. Then the final item of the night came up, a large, abstract painting by a famous local artist. It was the centerpiece of the auction. The bidding started fast, quickly climbing into the 6 figures. Soon, it was a 2-man race, a well-known tech billionaire and Silas Thorne. Thorne was enjoying the spotlight, his bids calm and confident. The billionaire dropped out at $200,000. The auctioneer was about to bring the hammer down. Sold to Mr. Silas Thorne. $250,000, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. I didn't even raise my hand. I just spoke the words, a lazy, dismissive drawl. Every head turned towards my table. I saw Thorne's eyes lock onto me. His polite smile didn't falter, but I saw a flicker of something else in his gaze. Annoyance, intrigue. He nodded to the auctioneer. 260. 300, I said, without missing a beat, taking a sip of my champagne. I made it look like I was buying a cup of coffee. A low murmur went through the crowd. Thorne's smile tightened. He was no longer just buying a painting. He was defending his territory. He couldn't afford to be outbid, to be publicly neutered by this unknown newcomer. 310, he countered. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then I laughed, a short, sharp sound. You know what? He can have it, I said to the room at large. I don't even like it that much. The humiliation was palpable. I hadn't just outbid him, I'd made his victory seem pathetic. I had demonstrated that I had the money to beat him, but considered the prize, and by extension him, unworthy of my effort. I had played with him, and then discarded him. I stood up, threw my napkin on the table, and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel his eyes on my back. The bait was in the water. The shark was circling. The invitation would be coming soon. The invitation did not come as a phone call or an email. That would have been too common, too traceable. Thorne's methods were more refined. 3 days after the auction, a woman appeared at my door. She was tall, impossibly elegant in a severe black dress, and introduced herself as Isabella. She said she was a concierge for a private client who had been impressed by my passion at the charity event. She handed me a single heavy card, matte black with a simple embossed silver address. Shakuntanonam, Crane Street, and a time 10 p.m. that evening. There was no RSVP. It was an assumption of attendance. Our host values discretion above all else, she said, her smile a perfect professional curve that didn't reach her cold, observant eyes. He believes you might appreciate an environment where a man of your appetites can feel at home. It was a performance, and I was the audience. She wasn't a concierge, she was a scout, sent to take my measure in person. I played my part. I was Marcus Vanderbilt, the bored aristocrat. I barely glanced at the card, tossing it onto a nearby table with feigned indifference. Appetites. My dear, you make me sound so vulgar, I drawled. But tell your host I'm intrigued. I have nothing better to do tonight. Her smile widened by a millimeter. The hook had been taken. That night, I didn't drive the Aston Martin. It was too flashy, too much of a statement. A man like Marcus would take a black car service, an anonymous testament to his wealth. As the car pulled up to the featureless brick facade of the warehouse, the single steel door hissed open before we came to a full stop. Two men in sharp, dark suits, their faces impassive, stood waiting. They were not bouncers. They were professional security, their eyes constantly scanning, their posture radiating a quiet competence that spoke of military or federal training. The interior was a study in calculated seduction. The industrial harshness of the exterior vanished, replaced by a world of dark mahogany, worn leather, and muted gold light. This air was thick with the scent of expensive whiskey and quiet desperation. There were no slot machines, no flashing lights, no raucous cheers. The space was divided into intimate, soundproofed lounges where games of poker, baccarat, and blackjack were underway. The staff were all, like Isabella, impossibly beautiful and moved with a silent, ghostly efficiency. There were no clocks on the walls. This was a place designed to make you forget time, to make you forget the outside world, to make you forget everything but the game. I saw Jessica in my mind's eye, sitting at one of these tables, her face illuminated by the low-hanging lamps, her hope rising and falling with the turn of a card. My resolve hardened into a razor's edge. Isabella materialized at my elbow. Mr. Vanderbilt, our host is expecting you. She led me to a private room at the back, dominated by a single green felt blackjack table. Silas Thorne was sitting there, not playing, but observing. He rose as I entered, his hand extended, his smile radiating a predatory charm. Mr. Vanderbilt, he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. A pleasure to finally meet you. I'm Silas Thorne. I must apologize for my competitive streak at the auction. You almost cost me a very pretty painting. Please call me Marcus, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes analytical. He was scanning me, assessing me, just as I was him. And don't apologize. A man who isn't competitive is a man who's used to losing. I simply decided the prize wasn't worth the fight. The subtle dig landed exactly as I intended. A flicker of respect, or perhaps anticipation, crossed his face. A man who knows his own limits? A rare quality? Please join me. The first drink and the first buy-in are on the house. We sat down. The dealer was a statue, his hands moving with hypnotic speed and precision. We played and we talked. The game was a backdrop for the real contest, a verbal chess match. He probed, asking about my family, my business in Seattle, my interests. I fed him the prepackaged lies of Marcus Vanderbilt, the trust fund rebel with a chip on his shoulder and a reckless streak. I found Seattle to be a bit provincial, I said, casually discarding a card. full of people who made their money by writing code. New money. It lacks a certain character, a certain appreciation for real risk. Thorne smiled. We don't deal in luck here, Marcus. We deal in opportunity. We provide a space for men of vision to act on their convictions. It was the same kind of empty, grandiose language he had used to ensnare my wife. For an hour, I played smart. I won a little, lost a little. I established myself as a competent player, not a fool. Then, as I knew he would, Thorne began to apply the pressure. He made a subtle signal to the dealer. The cards started to turn against me. My stack of chips began to dwindle. I let my frustration show, a flash of anger, a reckless doubling of my bets. I was down nearly $100,000 when Thorne leaned in, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. The cards are cold, Marcus. Perhaps your conviction is wavering. That was the goad. That was the moment. Let's make this interesting, I said, pushing the remainder of my chips, another 100,000, into the betting circle. One hand, double or nothing. Thorne's eyes lit up. This was it. The moment the fish swallows the hook. As you wish, he said, settling back in his chair to watch the kill. The dealer dealt the cards. I had a 19, a strong hand. The dealer showed a 6. The odds were overwhelmingly in my favor. And then it happened. I stood up abruptly, feigning a clumsy stumble, and knocked my glass of whiskey over the table. Damn it! I cursed, grabbing for napkins. The amber liquid spread across the felt, stopping just short of the cards. In the chaos, as the staff rushed to clean up the mess, and Thorne looked on with amusement at my drunken clumsiness, my real move was made. My phone was in my left hand. Attached to it was a new charging cable. The USB-C connector on the end was not a connector. It was a custom-built, solid-state drive and a wireless transmitter, a tiny digital parasite I'd designed myself. As I leaned over the table, ostensibly to help clean up, I reached for the small multi-port hub attached to the dealer's terminal, a slim screen used for tracking bets and player credit. Under the guise of steadying myself, my fingers found the USB port. The magnetic tip of my fake cable clicked silently into place. It took less than a second. My apologies, Silas, I said, slumping back into my chair. Sloppy of me. Think nothing of it, he said, his smile widening. Now shall we see the dealer's card? He turned over his card. It was a 5. He had 11. He hit. A king. 21. The dealer raked my chips away. $200,000 gone. I didn't flinch. I laughed, the sound loud and a little unhinged. The perfect performance of a man who didn't care. Well, it's only money, I said, standing up. You run a fine establishment, Silas. I have a feeling I'll be back for a chance to win it back. The house is always open, he said, the picture of a gracious victor. I walked out of the warehouse and into the cool Seattle night, leaving $200,000 and the ghost of Marcus Vanderbilt behind. The car was waiting. As it pulled away, I took out my real phone, a hardened, encrypted device. I opened a simple terminal app and typed a single command. A moment later, a line of text appeared on the screen. Connection established. Welcome, Cassandra. I was in. The key was in the lock, and I was about to bring the whole house down. The drive back to my home on the lake was the calmest I had felt in weeks. The $200,000 I had lost was a trivial expense, the cost of admission. The real prize was the blinking cursor on my phone, a silent promise of the carnage to come. Marcus Vanderbilt had served his purpose. He was the Trojan horse, a carefully crafted fiction designed to breach the walls. Now, the soldier inside was ready to emerge. I didn't go to my office. I went straight to the basement. The air was cool and still, the only sound the low, steady hum of my servers. On the central monitor, a simple interface was active, showing a raw data stream. The tiny device I'd planted in the dealer's terminal was working perfectly. It had established a secure, heavily cloaked tunnel from inside Thorn's network directly to my Cassandra server. For a moment, I just watched the packets of data flow across the screen. They were the lifeblood of Thorn's empire: bet records, credit lines, security camera feeds, internal communications. It was a torrent of raw, unfiltered information, a digital monument to greed and human misery. My first move was to secure my position. I navigated through their network with the silent precision of a ghost. Their security was robust but conventional, designed to repel outside attacks. It was utterly unprepared for a threat that was already inside the perimeter. I found their system logs, located the records of my device's connection, and erased them, rewriting the logs to show a routine diagnostic check from a known hardware address. I was now invisible, a god in their machine. With my access secured, the real work began. This wasn't going to be a smash and grab. I wasn't there to steal money. Stealing money was vulgar, and it would trigger alarms. My objective was more ambitious. I was going to perform a systemic demolition. I was going to turn the architect's own creation against him. My plan had 3 phases to be executed simultaneously. Phase 1, liberation. I delved into their financial records, the core of the operation. It was a masterpiece of predatory accounting. I saw the names of dozens of victims, their debts meticulously tracked, interest compounding at criminal rates. I saw Jessica's name, the red numbers next to it, a stark reminder of why I was here. $380,000. I wrote a simple, elegant script. It wasn't an attack. It was a program of radical forgiveness. The script would cycle through the entire client database. For every account with a balance under $500,000, the small-time victims, the people like my wife who had been bled dry but weren't yet useful for high-level extortion, the script would do 2 things. First, it would mark their debt as paid in full. Second, it would trigger the system's automated notification function, sending each of them a simple, anonymous text message. Your account with ST Holdings has been settled. You are free. For Jessica, I added a personal touch. I didn't just clear her debt. I rerouted a fraction of a cent from thousands of Thorn's internal transactions into her closed account until it had a positive balance of $1. A symbolic gesture. He had taken everything from her. I was making him pay her to leave. Phase 2, exposure. Thorn's greatest asset wasn't money, it was information. His servers were a treasure trove of secrets, a library of compromat. I found encrypted folders containing recordings, audio and video from the private rooms, conversations where powerful city council members admitted to bribery, where tech CEOs discussed insider trading, where judges made promises they shouldn't have. Thorn didn't just run a casino, he ran a private intelligence agency, and his leverage was the secrets of his clients. I began to copy everything. Terabytes of data siphoned through my cloaked tunnel to my secure servers. It was the city's dirty laundry, and I was about to air it all. I created a series of Dead Man Switch email accounts, set to deliver their payloads at a specific time. One email, containing the complete, unedited financial records of the casino's money laundering operation through the art galleries, was addressed to a specific, notoriously bulldog-like investigator at the IRS's Criminal Investigation Division. Another email, containing a curated selection of the most explosive recordings involving public officials, was addressed to the Investigative Reporting Desk at the Seattle Times. A third, more personal email was for Thorne, second in command, a man named Victor. The contents were simple: security footage from Thorne's penthouse office showing Thorne meeting with a rival, clearly negotiating a deal to cut Victor out. Thorne's paranoia was his undoing. He recorded everyone, even his allies. I was going to use his own paranoia to detonate his organization from within. Phase 3, annihilation. This was the final, most surgical strike. Thorne's personal wealth, the money he had already laundered and siphoned off, was held in a series of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Breaking into those banks directly would be difficult and time-consuming. But I didn't have to. I had access to his central nervous system. I was inside his personal laptop, the one he used to manage his empire. I had his master key. I found the encrypted file containing all his access credentials. It took Cassandra 4 hours to brute force the final layer of decryption. Once I was in, the world was open to me. I didn't steal the money for myself. That was never the point. Instead, I initiated a series of transfers, millions of dollars flowing out of Silas Thorne's accounts. The destination wasn't another hidden account. The destination was a list of hundreds of charities I had pre-selected: gambling addiction support groups, shelters for the homeless, legal aid societies, and investigative journalism foundations. I was turning his ill-gotten gains into a poison pill. By the time the banks could trace the transfers, the money would be distributed so widely, so charitably, that trying to claw it back would be a public relations nightmare. He wouldn't just lose his money, he would be forced to watch it be used to undo the kind of damage he had spent a lifetime creating. The scripts were written, the emails were queued, the transfers were programmed. Everything was automated, set to trigger in sequence at 6 a.m. I leaned back in my chair in the silent, cool darkness of my basement. The work was done. The complex, elegant system of Silas Thorne was now a perfectly constructed house of cards. All that was left to do was to blow it down. I typed the final command, execute. On the screen, a simple progress bar appeared. The demolition had begun. I went upstairs, made a pot of coffee, and waited for the sunrise. The sun rose over Lake Washington, painting the gray sky with muted strokes of pink and orange. The storm had passed. In the kitchen, the only sounds were the gentle drip of the coffee maker and the soft scrape of a knife as I sliced an onion for an omelet. I felt a profound, almost unnerving calm. The code had been compiled and executed. The system was now operating on its own, and the results were cascading, unstoppable. Jessica came into the kitchen, wrapped in a robe. She looked like she had slept for 100 years, the deep, exhaustive sleep that follows a long fever. The dark circles under her eyes were still there, but the frantic, hunted look was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative peace. She was holding her phone in her hand, her knuckles white. "Michael," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I got a text message an hour ago." I didn't turn from the stove. "Oh, it It was from a number I don't know. It said my account was settled. It said I was free. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. What does it mean? Is it a trick? Let's have some breakfast, I said, my voice even. I slid the omelet onto a warm plate and placed it on the island in front of her. Eat. She stared at the food as if she didn't know what it was. She was a system on the verge of a reboot, unsure of which operating system to load. She picked up a fork, her hand trembling slightly. The small television mounted in the corner of the kitchen was on, tuned to the local morning news. It was background noise, the usual chatter about traffic, weather, and a local sports team's victory. And then the programming was interrupted. A breaking news graphic flashed across the screen in bold red and white. "We are coming to you live from Pioneer Square," a reporter said, her voice sharp with urgency over the sound of sirens, "where federal agents are conducting a major raid on the Thorne Gallery, owned by prominent Seattle philanthropist Silas Thorne." Jessica's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Her head snapped up to look at the screen. The camera showed a chaotic scene. FBI agents in tactical vests were carrying boxes of evidence out of the elegant, minimalist art gallery. The gallery's chic, frosted glass doors were shattered. Fours. Sources tell us this raid is part of a massive, coordinated takedown of what is being described as a sophisticated, illegal gambling and money laundering empire, the reporter continued. This comes on the heels of an unprecedented anonymous data leak that occurred in the pre-dawn hours. The leak reportedly exposed the entire financial structure of the criminal enterprise and included compromising information on several high-profile public figures in our city. My omelet sat untouched on my own plate. I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching the screen. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet hum of a problem solved. The news report cut to a different feed, live helicopter footage from high above a downtown skyscraper. Thorne's penthouse. "We have just received this footage," the anchor's voiceover said, showing Silas Thorne himself being taken into custody from his residence less than an hour ago. There he was, the architect, the master of control. He wasn't wearing one of his immaculate suits. He was in a silk bathrobe, his hands cuffed behind his back. His face, usually a mask of suave confidence, was a canvas of pure, uncomprehending shock. He looked small, broken. A system that had encountered a fatal, unexpected error. The reporter's voice faded into the background, becoming a meaningless drone of words. Dozens of the casino's former clients received notifications that their debts had been mysteriously erased overnight. Investigators are also looking into a series of massive, multi-million-dollar donations made from Thorne's offshore accounts to charities across the country. Jessica was no longer looking at the television. She was looking at me. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She was looking at me, but she was seeing someone else entirely. She was seeing the man who had stayed up all night in the basement, the man who had moved through the house with a silent, chilling purpose for the past week, the man who was now sitting across from her, calmly drinking coffee while the world he had secretly rearranged burned on the screen behind him. Every question she had was answered in that single, silent moment. The text message, the news report, the impossible coincidence of it all. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a demolition. A quiet, methodical, an utterly devastating act of retaliation. And the architect of it was the man she had married, the calm, predictable programmer, the digital plumber. She didn't ask. She didn't have to. The truth was there, in the space between us, as solid and real as the table we sat at. Her fear of Silas Thorne was gone, replaced by a new, more profound, and infinitely more complex awe of the man in front of her. I met her gaze. My expression did not change. I gave her the only answer she would ever need. "Your debt is cleared," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "They won't bother you again." She flinched, as if the words themselves had a physical weight. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness or of joy. It was a tear of sheer, overwhelming shock. The husband she thought she had betrayed, the man she thought was a passive victim, was something else. She had opened a Pandora's box in our marriage, and she was only now beginning to understand what had come out. The news report continued, but neither of us heard it. The empire of Silas Thorne was falling apart on live television, but the real story was the new, heavy silence in our kitchen, a silence built not on secrets, but on a terrible, world-altering truth. 6 months passed. The Seattle autumn bled into a damp, gray winter, and then gave way to the tentative green of spring. The news cycle, a voracious and forgetful beast, moved on. Silas Thorne, a spectacular downfall, became old news, a ghost story the city's elite would whisper about for years to come. The politicians and business leaders caught in the blast wave of my data leak either resigned in disgrace or faded into a quiet, permanent obscurity. The system I had targeted had been comprehensively dismantled. Our house on the lake was quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence. The tense, brittle quiet of secrets and lies had been replaced by the heavy, thoughtful silence of a shared, unspoken truth. Jessica goes to meetings on Tuesday and Thursday nights. She never misses one. She took a job at a small gallery in Fremont, curating for an artist collective. It pays a fraction of what she used to make, but I see a light in her eyes that has been absent for years. A steady, authentic glow, not the manic, feverish glint of the gambler. She is rebuilding herself, piece by piece, on a foundation of honesty. We don't talk about what happened, not in any direct way. We don't talk about the warehouse or Silas Thorne or the impossible, terrifying night I brought his empire crashing down from our basement. We don't have to. It exists between us, a third entity in our marriage. It's the subtext of every quiet dinner, every shared glance across the living room. She looks at me differently now. The comfortable, slightly condescending affection she once had for her quiet, predictable husband is gone. In its place is something far more complex, a mixture of fear, gratitude, and a profound, bottomless awe. She is living with a man she knows she will never fully understand. We are polite. We are kind to each other. We are building a new life, but we are essentially strangers, bound not by a shared past, but by a shared, devastating secret. A few weeks ago, a courier delivered a heavy wooden box to the house. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in straw, was a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle 23-year-old bourbon, a bottle so rare and expensive it's practically a myth. Tucked alongside it was a small, folded note, written in a familiar, blocky script. "Reeves, damn if I know how you did it. And I don't want to know. But thanks. The city's breathing a little easier. F." I poured myself a glass that night, the bourbon a warm, smoky fire in my chest. It was a final sign-off from the analog world, a nod of professional respect. Frank understood. He had gathered the intelligence, pointed me at the target, and then stepped back, content to let the storm break without asking how the lightning was made. I'm in my office now. The late afternoon sun is breaking through the clouds, glinting off the surface of the lake. On my monitors, there is code, a messy, inefficient block of it for a mid-level financial services company. A clogged digital pipe that needs fixing. I am Michael Reeves, digital plumber, the man who makes the noise go away. That is the reality I have chosen, the silence I have paid for. But downstairs, in the cool, dry dark of the basement, Cassandra sleeps, not dismantled, not destroyed, dormant. The tools are there, the systems are in place, a silent testament to the man I used to be and the man I could become again if the need arose. Silas Thorne called himself the architect. He saw people as systems to be manipulated, their weaknesses as bugs to be exploited. He believed he had built an unbreachable fortress of wealth, fear, and information. But he made the classic designer's mistake. He was so focused on the strength of his walls that he ignored the vulnerability of his own design. He couldn't resist the allure of ultimate control, the ego-driven need for a single point of access, for a back door that only he could use. He built a fortress and gave himself a single master key, never imagining that someone else might find it. He forgot the first rule of any system, whether it's made of code or of people. The greatest vulnerability is never the technology. It's the hubris of its creator. I look away from the screen, out at the calm gray water. The work is done. The invoice is sent. The silence is restored.